Once again, welcome back. Just real quick, sorry if my voice sounds weird. I'm getting over a little cold, but folks, I am highly caffeinated for this section on 4.0, Chapter 4, Fortress Fundamentals. We're going to talk a ton about end users, right? They are, in fact, the first line of defense when it comes to a good cybersecurity architecture, right? So we'll talk about how we're going to train end users, what that looks like, how often we should do it. Definitely going to talk about passwords. And remember, at any point, anyone is an end user, right? Best practice, administrators should have an administrator account that they do administrative stuff on and a separate account when they're doing end user stuff, checking their email, writing reports, etc., right? We will also look at that delicate balance between privacy and security, and then we'll finish off with physical security. So let's go. Part 1 looks like this. I like to start with a little history, a little information as to the importance, so we'll jump right into that. So, today our world is definitely hyper-connected and getting more hyper-connected every day, right? We're adding IoT devices. We've got our smartphones that we're on, some teenagers 4 to 6 hours a day. Data is the new gold, right? Think of all the social media companies that keep all of this data on us. It is the new gold. It is the treasures of corporations today, right? So, we need to really think about flipping that cybersecurity script, right? That says, okay, we got to do all this protection. But what is our greatest risk? It's end users. That can be seen by this data that I'm providing here. So InfoSec, which, by the way, more detail is provided in the textbook. If you'd like a copy, let me know. I'm writing it as I go. So InfoSec says 74% of breaches caused by end users. Stanford and cybersecurity firm Tessian says 88%, and IBM says 95%. That's an average of 85.6% of all security breaches start with an end user, whether it's clicking, whether it's picking up a drive, in the parking lot, picking up that candy drop, plugging it into a machine that an administrator didn't turn off the ability to use USB, you name it, okay? Stuxnet all over again. So instead of focusing solely on, external attackers, let's spotlight the end user. And we are end users as well. So early, 1960s, 1970s, security was really around physical security. These mainframe computers took up buildings, took up large rooms. All we needed to do was secure the room. You can't get in and do malicious things on the computer, right? But then we start networking these computers. Well, MIT professor Fernando Corbato, I hope that's how I pronounce it, he builds this time-sharing computer, and everybody wants to use it, right? So he's actually the one that came up with the first digital password. That way, individual users had a password, they had time, they put in their password, that was their computer time, okay? 80s and 90s roll around, Windows 1.0, what the heck was a password, right? Windows 95, passwords really kind of start to take hold. Now, I'm so old, I worked on computers back then, a lot of end user computers, and the first thing they said is, can you get rid of this stupid thing? Just when I turn it on, just make it go to the desktop screen, right? There was no focus on security until more networking, the internet, and all of these notable security breaches. So, what comes about? Password cracking. That's what started this. So suddenly we needed to focus on making sure we had passwords so that people couldn't just literally sit down to a computer, turn it on, and be inside of it, right? And when it comes to password cracking, pretty easy process. We'll talk a little bit about a vulnerability a little later on in this lecture series. We're going to talk about RockU 2024. Close to 10 billion plain text passwords that can be used for password cracking. So, how do password cracking used to work? Well, we guessed it. People used to share it. You just asked them and they're like, oh, here's my password. Go use the computer. That's cool. Social engineering to get it. We've talked about that. And of course, desktop scavenging, where in my day, we just looked underneath the keyboard. People would write it down, put it behind the monitor. I actually remember going to the doctor's office one time and finding the nurse's password on a sticky note on her monitor. So, because they had just changed them and she was memorizing them. Air quotes coming up there. So, let's move on past that. Importance of user awareness training. Hugely, hugely important, right? And it starts with the end user, and it starts with empowering the end user, right? Building a culture of vigilance, of resilience, and they become our main defense, right? So we have to treat them with the respect, we have to train them, we have to let them know how to identify and respond to potential threats. We don't want them just deleting that email because perhaps that email's been sent to the whole company, and if it can get to IT, then we can build an email filter that'll take that out so other people don't accidentally click on it. We reduce that risk, right? So pretty important stuff when it comes to training. Here's AI doing a little phishing awareness training for us here. Types of end user training. So, before we talk about types, let's talk about passwords and user accounts, because this is where it starts, right? And IT is responsible for user provisioning. Now, just an FYI, when we see a term in gray followed by a definition in orange, that's a term you should be taking notes on. You should be memorizing it. You're going to see it in the ISC2 certification exam. All right. So as we go through this, just a quick FYI. So user provisioning, IT. Well, we create user accounts and set a default password, right? When a user is onboarded. So we create that account. Now, one of the biggest things that I see companies forget is when employees go on leave, we want to suspend their account, right? If they're not working from home, they're not working remotely, let's reduce our attack vector and suspend their account. Pretty simply done. When they come back to work, boom, they're back to work. Now, if we have to ask an employee to get off the bus, we have to offboard an employee, we need to have a clear policy and procedure with HR that IT is notified in ample time, okay, exactly when that employee is going to be leaving so that we can deactivate their account at that time when they're asked to leave the company, okay? I personally have had an experience where an employee wasn't allowed to leave. Was asked to leave. I think I shared this with you. Went back to his desk, deleted a bunch of files. Why? Because they were angry on their way out. Well, if we have a good policy and procedure with HR, that doesn't happen, right? Now, we're not going to delete their account because perhaps one of the reasons why they're being asked to leave has to do with data security. So consequently, we want to go back and audit those user log files. We want to see where they went, what they downloaded, etc. So we don't delete accounts. Your company should come up with whatever retention policy works for that company to retain employee accounts. I suggest at least a year. Okay. Some companies, especially with Active Directory and the number of accounts you can have, etc., will actually just deactivate an account, create an organizational unit for deactive accounts, and keep them there. A lot of times, by the way, folks, people who leave the company for greener pastures find out they're not as green and come back. So we don't have to recreate that user. We don't have to recreate their permissions, right? Especially if we're using role-based access control, which we'll talk about in a future chapter. So different types of training. We've already talked about phishing. We have to train users on what phishing looks like. Now, there actually, if you Google, is the Google phishing quiz. It's a really short 10-minute phishing quiz. It's great. I give it to my students in my CIS 120 class and an Intro to Cyber class so that they can learn. we have to become experts because we're the trainers, right? Training the end users. So phishing awareness, password management training. What does it mean to create a good password? Multi-factor authentication if your company uses it. Even if your company doesn't use it, right? Training users on it is important. Remember that the practices that they learn through your training, they are not only practicing inside the company, but hopefully in their individual personal lives, right? So, as I tell students, you should never, ever, ever have a bank account without multi-factor authentication. It just should never be done, right? Social engineering training, so how to, identify those human psychological exploits that happen, how to combat them, again, how to report them, right? Every exploit, every potential threat should be reported, not just that email phishing scam, okay? So, secure browsing and online habits, again, if they practice this in their home life and they're going to share this with their family, right? So we're helping the whole world as it pertains to cybersecurity protection. So secure browsing, online habits, training, what to click on, what not to click on, how to mouse over and check a link, how to look at that link, go back to that link, make sure it's legit, right? Incident reporting, hugely important. When it comes to incident reporting, these cannot be big, long forms. This may just be forwarding an email, right, to incidents at IT department, whatever, okay? In other cases, it can be a form. In large organizations, this becomes a software that manages these so we can start trending. We can see what's going on in the way of incidents. But the biggest thing is it's got to be simple. Right? It's got to be simple and it's got to be quick. Otherwise, people are going to just delete the email. They're going to not report the fact that they were almost tailgated walking into the building by so-and-so, whatever the case may be. And we want that to be reported. So physical security threats, we'll talk about that around, personal devices, laptops, mobile devices, as well as physical access into buildings, into secure areas within buildings, etc. Okay? So how do we train users? Well, just like this course, utilizing e-learning modules, these offer flexibility, right? They're constant training. We can create a training once and distribute it to hundreds of thousands of people if we want to. For example, in the next section, when we talk about passwords, I'm going to make that readily available on some of my social media accounts to help people understand what makes a good password, multi-factor authentication, you name it, right? So e-learning works really well. People can do the training at their convenience, right? But in-person training has a huge impact as well. We can bring in guest speakers and seminars. Micro-learning is huge, right? So short focus. This isn't a day-long session where everybody's going to get bored and fall asleep after lunch, okay? Short, quick sessions. These can be in person, they can be on Zoom, getting people involved, getting people engaged in their learning. That's the key. Just-in-time training, the last one, is utilized a lot when there's a failed end user audit. So we go out, we send an end user a phishing email, and darn if they don't click on it. But when they click on that link, instead of doing something malicious, it takes them out to just a quick just-in-time training. It might be a video, it might be a quick quiz, just to remind them that, hey, you just broke a policy. When it comes to frequency, we definitely always want to train users when they onboard. It should be part of the process. They need to understand, they need to start feeling our culture as it pertains to security, right? They need to understand our rules, our policies, regulations, whatever the case may be. After that, regular training is important. We forget things, okay? I'm so old I forget things in 10 minutes. Luckily, I don't have to train every 10 minutes on cybersecurity. But quarterly, biannually, those reminders, an opportunity to discuss new threats that might be out there, that might be prevalent, okay? Interactive workshops, with gamification. So, utilizing game-based learning, getting people active, getting them involved and engaged. That's how people learn, right? Finally, we got to make sure that the training we're doing, that people are learning, that end users are learning, and that means auditing users. So like I suggested, phishing simulations, we can do the boring quizzes. A lot of times what I'll do is I'll create an interactive video that has quiz questions throughout the video. So that works really well. Again, you create that one time. It may take a little longer to create, but it becomes part of that training library that can be used 1 or 1,000,000 times, right? In addition, we can look at some advanced things in the way of auditing users, utilizing user behavior analytics, feedback mechanisms, finding out how they enjoyed their training. Was it boring? We want their honest feedback, because if end users have to sit in a 2-hour boring training, they're not learning anything, okay? They're learning just what they need to learn to pass the test. I've been on that side as well. Let me assure you of that. So, reporting security incidents, finally, to sort of finish out this section here, we have to have a culture that empowers employees to feel comfortable and to be part of our security strategy. The biggest part, right? The first line of defense, to report these things, or they're not going to report. Reporting mechanisms should be clear. Like I said, keep them simple. They should be straightforward. We don't need a dissertation from the employee. We just need them to report every incident. Immediate response. So one of the things that I really dislike as an end user is I might report something and I don't hear back from ITS. If you want to get end users involved, get them part of the culture, respond to them, not just with that, that BS form thank you letter, but what happened? What actions were taken by ITS? Okay. And then of course, as I suggested, the utilizing automated tools, software lets us trend, lets us figure things out, lets us also record and keep logs of training that we've completed. So that's it for this section. I'll see you in the next section, part 2, where we're going to discuss passwords and phrases. See you then.